Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the September webinar on Seeds to Success. My name is Eric Winford. I'm the Associate Director of the Range On Center and based in Boise, and I'm also a faculty member in Range On Ecology and Management. And our speaker today is our very own Lauren King, who's co-hosting this webinar with me. Lauren's an Extension Educator, and she is going to be talking about species selection for restoration success. And before I let Lauren go, I just want to highlight two things. One, we have a YouTube channel where you can watch videos that have been previously recorded, and I'll put that in the chat. The other thing is we will have an October Seeds to Success, October 23rd on a Thursday, same time, fourth Thursday of the month. And if you have any ideas for topics that you'd like to hear, please let us know. You can put those in the chat or email me at ewinford@uidaho.edu. And if you have any questions for Lauren, please also put those in the chat and we'll answer those once Lauren's finished. Okay, with that, I'll let Lauren do a further introduction of herself and her topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. As Eric said, my name is Lauren King. I'm an extension educator for the University of Idaho. I'm based out of Benoit County, so my office is in St. Mary's. My county is primarily timber focused, but we do have some agriculture as well. I've been in this extension role about a year, but prior to that, I worked at the University of Idaho's Pitkin Forest Nursery, which grows about 500,000 seedlings across 70 species, and I did all the outreach and sales for them. And so I've dabbled quite a bit in the picking different species for restoration sites. So with that, I will go ahead and get started and share my screen, and we can start going. All right. Let's make sure I can get this to go. Alrighty, so like I said, I'm going to talk about species selection for restoration. And so I figured I'd break it down, just starting out with what is restoration, and that it's the process of assisting the recovery of a native ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. This picture is at a fairly large restoration site that the Coeur d'Alene tribe was doing. They did a 4-mile rechannelization project that I had the opportunity to take one of my programs out to, and we were able to walk it and kind of see what they're doing. Doesn't look all that impressive in this picture, but they had just opened up the channel and the water had just started flowing through it. So within the next year or two, it'll look significantly different. But that was a huge undertaking, and it was really cool to walk a project of that scale. So there's 3 stages of ecosystem decline according to the Society of Ecological Restoration. The first one is damage, and that's fairly low. Sometimes the site can recover on its own. Degradation is going to be that mid-level. It's still going to be a longer term impact, but it's a lot easier to fix it. And then destruction is the most severe level of impact, and it takes a lot of effort to restore that ecosystem. And so, like for that rechannelization project I just showed, they basically destroyed that ecosystem to redo it. But they went from the ground up, and they're hoping for a lot of success on that one. And sometimes that's the best way to do it. You take a low or a mid-level one, and you just take it back to ground zero to restart. So, when you're thinking of a restoration project, there's a lot of goals that you need to keep in mind, whether that's environmental, productivity, and economic, if it's community, or just long-term planning and management goals. And that's going to vary based on who you are, what your site is, and just what you want to get out of it. If you want to fix up part of a Palouse prairie, or if you're trying to rechannel a stream, that's going to be 2 very different goals and different things that you have to consider to get there. Um, when looking at your site, you need to look at the size and scope of your project. Are you looking at an acre, a half acre, 4 miles, hundreds of acres? Is this post-fire? Is this just fixing your property that you've purchased and you're trying to make it better? Do you have access to water? Is it a stream? If it's not a stream, you might not have water close by, but being able to water plants that you're planting is going to help in those establishment of those plants, especially for the first 3 years. If you can give them any water, they're going to be a lot happier. Your site aspect, is it north or south facing? How hot is it? Is it a riparian site, desert, prairie, meadow, forest, something in between? Um, the ease of access. You might have a site that you want to restore, but if it's 10 miles up in the backcountry, that's going to be a lot harder to get to than if it's in your own yard. And being able to get there with plants to restore it or heavy machinery, if you have to get in there, is going to affect the cost of it as well as the amount of effort and time that's going to take to do. And then animal usage. If you're restoring something, I'm guessing you're not going to have livestock on it right away, but some people try and do both at the same time. So you might need to look at fencing off plantings. Um, we also have those pesky wildlife that will come in and destroy all of your hard work sometimes. So that's just something to keep in mind. Are you having a fence, put tree tubes on? Are you going to have to restrict movement with high fences? Just kind of depending on what your goals are, will affect how you're going forward. Um, Once you have your goals, your site, you kind of think about your timeline. Is this going to be a quick fix? Is this going to be a 10-year project? Are you looking to spend a couple $100, buy some plants, call it good? Or are you going to be investing thousands, or millions, depending on if what type of project you're doing? If it's just landowner, small scale, you're not going to be investing all that much. But if you're working with a federal agency, you might have large grants and you might be putting forth a lot more money. And so just figuring out how much you have to spend, how many years you're looking at doing that, and then from there you can figure out your next steps. So let's talk about species. All this information I took from uh, the U of I's Pick and Forest Nursery. They have a species catalog that goes more in depth than this. But since I already had this information from previous stuff, I just adapted it for this presentation. And I just kind of picked some species that are commonly used in restoration. There's so many more options. I'm going to focus on trees and shrubs in this. I think I have at least one forb in here. I don't talk about grasses at all, even though that is a huge part of restoration. That's just not what I specialize in. So I just figured I'd go with what I had more information on. First one I want to talk about is thinleaf alder. It's great in riparian areas and for soil stabilizing. It's classified as a shrub typically. Shrubs have multiple branching stems, but some people call it a tree. It grows relatively fast as far as plants grow. It prefers wet and moist sites, and it's going to do best in zones 2 through 7. Red osier dogwood, um, also for repairing and soil stabilization. It likes moist, rich soils. It does well in sun or shade. Its berries also provide wildlife forage. It grows fast and within zones 2 through 8. This one's a pretty common one that I see a lot for restoration projects. Black hawthorn, even though a lot of people don't like dealing with it because of its thorns, it's really, really good for restoration. It establishes in a lot of areas that not a lot of things want to grow sometimes. Um, it's relatively slow growing. The berries are also good for wildlife, and it can do well as a windbreak as well as in those riparian areas, and it will help hold the soil. Zones 4 through 7. Myself personally, I'm working on restoring my acreage that I got that was not in good health when we purchased it. And I finally admitted to myself that I needed to plant black hawthorn this spring, despite the fact that I don't want to deal with the thorns, but it's going to create a good barrier as well as provide a lot of wildlife habitat, and it's going to help hold the soil and keep my goats off the fence, which will also be nice. Coyote willow and willows in general are really, really good in riparian areas. What's nice about them, you don't even need a seedling. You can just plant a whip, which is just essentially a branch. When one of our first talks, we had Levi Dawes of Wildlife Habitat Nursery on here, and he talked a lot about using whips for repair and restoration. They grow fast. They do require a lot of water. So if these are not on a stream, you're going to make sure that you are giving them a lot of water. Otherwise, they're likely not going to establish quickly. Black cottonwood is has some similar uses to the willows. Um, it's a lot more shallow rooted, but it's still really flood tolerant. It grows fast. Um, the negative of black cottonwood is you get all that white cotton floating around. But as I've heard a lot of growers say, they don't think that's necessarily something you should factor in when you're planting it because the cotton's not going to become a problem for 20 to 30 years. And so it's not something you have to worry about in the short term at all. Um, in zones 1 through 8 on those, it really likes lower elevation, sheltered valleys, and stream banks. Water birch, another one of those riparian loving species, really, really good on stream bank restoration sites and for rechannelizing projects. It's a fast growth rate, will thrive in a variety of soils and elevations. In zones 4 through 6, so a little bit narrower band with the water birch. There's other species of birch as well, that will thrive in different environments. I just didn't like with the willow. One of them was good enough to talk about. Idaho hybrid poplar is becoming incredibly popular as well. It does not produce cotton, like the cottonwood. It can also be established with just using whips. It is a hybrid species, obviously, from other poplars, but they do very well. They grow fast, they establish quickly. They're good on a variety of sites, but they prefer the well-drained soils. They're really popular for windbreaks as well as repair and restoration. A little bit wider band than the water birch at zones 3 through 7. And if you don't know what zone you're in, the USDA has a cold hardiness map that you can look up your zone and figure that out on your own for your specific sites. Chokecherry, this is a really popular one for wildlife benefits. The berries are good wildlife forage. Um, One of those shrub tree things, depending on what you want to call it. It is drought tolerant, and it grows relatively fast. Good for stabilizing the soil on banks and as a windbreak. You'll find it in some of those hard to grow areas because it is drought tolerant. And once again, zones 2 through 6. Ocean spray. I'm actually at a growers meeting, seedling growers meeting right now, and I learned this morning about how there's some researchers looking at doing micropropagation of an ocean spray that has more of a pink blushed color to the flowers and the stem. So if you see those, you should purchase those. Those look really cool. I'm excited to see what those do long term. It's just a different variant of the main ocean spray, but they do really good in open forest or disturbed sites. I see this commonly as I'm out trail riding. It's partial to full sun. It's a little bit slower growing than some of the other shrubs, but it still does good in soil stabilization and windbreaks, and it has a little bit more color to it, and the flowers are really attractive to a lot of people. So it's a nice one that's still native to plant in areas that you're going to look at it a lot more. Serviceberry, another one of my favorites. It's a taller shrub. I have some of my property that are way too tall. And I can't believe they're still considered a shrub, but they still have those multiple branching stems. They do have edible fruits for both humans and animals. You can make good jams out of it. If you want a dual purpose plant. It is cold hardy and drought resistant, and it's really versatile and will grow in a lot of different areas. I live in a frost pocket and it is all over up there, so that's always good to know. Lewis syringa is the state flower of Idaho. It will grow on rocky hillsides, medium growth rate. It is drought tolerant, good for stabilizing soils and for windbreaks. The flowers also a nice one to be able to look at all the time. So if it's in a place that you're going to be looking at it, I suggest planting one that you like. It also provides a lot of wildlife habitat, especially for those small mammals and birds. Showy milkweed, um, this is the one 4 I have in here. This one's really popular for the monarch butterflies. It really likes disturbed sites. I see it all the time on roadways and in ditches. It is a forb, so it dies back every year. It is cold and drought tolerant. It will grow in full sun. It does not need shade. Um, some people say this one is a weed. It is technically a native plant, but it does kind of grow like a weed. So if you are wanting to keep it in a very specific area, I would keep in mind that I might not listen to that and it wants to go beyond, but it does have that nice big showy flower, and it is important for monarchs because that's where they lay their eggs, and the caterpillars will eat on the flowers or the plants. Blue elderberry, um, is another good wildlife habitat. It prefers moist, acidic soils, so more in those forest soils. It establishes easily. Its new growth will senesce and die back every year, especially when it's young. So until it becomes larger and has those woody stems, it might look like it's not doing so good over winter, but it will come back. It prefers full sun. It grows relatively fast. Its berries are also edible, but you have to be careful when processing them. You can't eat them raw. But that is something to take in consideration if you're looking for more dual use plants. Their berries are very clustery, and they look kind of like grapes as they're hanging on them, which is nice. And the leaves are they're very unique compared to the rest of our native plants in the area. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about your conifer species now. So Douglas fir, uh, reforestation species, one of the most popular species in Idaho for reforestation. As far as conifers go, medium-ish growth rate. It prefers well-drained soils. Um, Especially with conifers, you want to make sure, I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but making sure you know what seed source you're getting and where that's from. Um, when I was growing at the Pitkin Nursery, we were trying to figure out why we couldn't get one of the Doug first seedlots it did not want to go dormant. It just kept growing. And turns out the researcher that gave us seed, actually, it was a coastal seed source. And so they have a different growing season there, and they take a lot more drastic temperatures to get them to go dormant. And so that's why they look so different and they had a different growing. So there is inland and coastal, especially for the conifers. So just something to keep in mind. Western larch is one of my favorite conifers. I actually did one of my first master's project was on looking at Western larch and nitrogen uptake. But it is our deciduous conifer here in Idaho, so you do get the yellowing and purple needles in the fall before they fall off, and then you get the nice bright green new growth every year. It is relatively pest resistant. You don't have the beetle issues. The largest pest issue typically is the larch case bearer, but since they lose their needles every year, it doesn't generally take over. And suitable on a variety of sites, and it's really popular for firewood because it has those high BTU values. It is one of the faster growing conifer species, so it can get to maturity a lot quicker. It's becoming really popular for foresters to replant after logging. Ponderosa pine, also a very well-known species in Idaho as far as conifers go. It will grow where nothing else wants to grow. It will grow on hot and dry sites. You see it in the canyons, on the riverbanks, where there looks like there's just rock and you have a giant ponderosa pine growing. It is a very valuable timber species. It's a little bit slower growing than the larch at a medium growth rate, but it still will do a lot. Really common for reforestation and windbreaks. Western white pine is the state tree of Idaho. It is not as planted as it once was, mainly due to the blister rust. But there is a lot of genetically tested seed that is um, We've bred seed to make it blister rust resistant. With resistancy, you don't want 100% resistance because then that blister rust is just going to mutate. And so if you have about 60% resistance, most of the trees will survive. So that's what the generation of blister rust resistancy that we have right now is. There is a seed orchard outside of Moscow that does the blister rust resistant seed, and that's where a lot of seed buyers are getting their blister rust resistant seed from. It prefers middle to upper slopes and a northern exposure. It's one of the medium growth rate conifers, and it's primarily used for reforestation. With the western white pine, especially with the blister rust, you want to make sure you're not planting it alongside currants because the ribes plants are what are going to be the host for that blister rust. Western red cedar, it's one of the more valuable timber species. Everyone kind of knows about it. It has the scale-like needles rather than your typical pine needles. It likes moist slopes and stream banks. It does well in riparian areas. It is fast growing. Once it's cut down, it doesn't rot for a long time, so it's good for building stuff. It's known for having the giant old growth forests, so it can be hard to get established sometimes. It doesn't love being in full sun. It likes those cooler areas, and deer, elk, moose love to eat it. And so that is a consideration to keep in mind if you're planning on planting cedar. I was talking to a forester yesterday actually about how we need to figure out a way to get western red cedar to be easier to establish on sites because it's one of the trickier ones to do. So as far as planting goes, if you're investing in trees, whether they be seedlings or a little bit more mature, you want to make sure they're planted effectively. Otherwise, you're just wasting money buying stuff if you can't get them in the ground. So looking at site prep, like I said earlier, your accessibility to the site is going to be important. I had a field site a number of years ago that well, we didn't have the key to the gate that we needed to get to, so we ended up having to pack trees a mile in, which was not ideal. But they had to get planted. Later on, we figured out how to get up there and got the key to the gate. But that's just something to keep in mind of how far do you have to go to plant something? Can you get vehicles up there? Can you get there all year round? Are you going to have snow issues? If it's too wet, can you not get up there? You want to plant in mineral soil. You don't want to be planting in duff or slash, which can be tricky sometimes. And then you can site prep a number of ways, whether it's mechanical of herbicide or prescribed burning. It should be done before planting to minimize plant disturbance. I know that seems somewhat self-explanatory, but you never know. I've seen people that plant trees and they do a broadcast spray and they wonder why their trees died. So that's just something to keep in mind. You want to site prep before you plant to make it be successful in the long term. So there's two main types of seedlings. So you have containerized seedlings and bare root seedlings. So containerized seedlings, they're really popular in the Northwest. They're grown in greenhouses typically. They do better on drier sites than bare root ones do. The larger the container, the more expensive. So if you pull a seedling out of a container and you're going to have soil media around your roots and it should hold together fairly well. These can be in the styrofoam blocks like you see in this picture. So this is at the Pitkin Nursery. This is an operational facility. Or you could be buying these in 1-gallon pots as well, and that's still technically considered containerized. And then you have bare root seedlings. Bare root seedlings are popular on the like Western Washington, Western Oregon, more coastal areas where it's more wet. These seedlings, this is more popular within the timber industry itself, not so much with shrubs and hardwood species or forbs, but they are grown outdoors, lifted with machinery, and the soil is removed from the roots, and then they're shipped quickly to retain moisture, and then you need to be planting them quickly. It's not as common in Idaho, but as you can see, you can plant a lot of seedlings in a very small area for bare root, and then there's just no soil media around those roots, so they are shipped and then planted just like that. What plants to buy? So You want to make sure you're getting good genetics or as good as you can get, and adapted seed sources if available. So, like that Western white pine, if you can get blister S seed, that's going to be your best chance for success. And you can also look to see if you're getting seed from tree improvement programs, growth for quantity or quality. When they're making seed orchards, they're going out in the forest and finding trees that are tall, straight, produce lots of cones, whatever that might be. And that's where they're getting that seed from. And then they keep it in orchards and they're able to harvest from those trees year after year. And then there's some insect and disease resistance, depending on the species that you're purchasing. And so you want to look at local seed zones as well. Like I said with that Doug fir, that we ended up with a coastal lot, and we're like, oh, that's why this isn't working. And so different species can be more or less flexible. The general rule of thumb across all species, you want to stay within 100 miles north or south and within 300 feet of elevation, but that varies greatly. I've seen a lot of the time where you can go within 600 or so feet. What you're planting at sea level is not going to be what you're planting in the mountains, but sometimes that might be your availability. And if you really want that species, sometimes you got to do that. Just know if you're planting something well out of its elevation band, you might need to make sure that you're giving it some supplemental help, whether that be watering, helping make sure it gets through the cold and goes dormant correctly the first couple years while it's getting established. And it's probably not going to grow as well as something that's needed for that area. How many to plant? Those flags technically are all trees. That's not how close you should plant things. But this was a research study, which is why they're planted that closely. But it definitely depends on your project, what you're doing. Typically, for forestry, your common stocking goal is between 300 to 400 trees per acre, which is about 10 by 10 spacing. You get 435 trees. So it's also going to vary on what you're doing. If you're making a windbreak, you're going to want them closer than that. If you're restoring Palouse Prairie, you might be planting forbs and stuff closer together, whereas your trees might be further apart. So it's going to be very site specific, but as far as trees go, you're not going to be likely planting more than 435 per acre. Purchasing plants, you want to order early. Most nurseries are taking custom grow orders 1 to 2 years in advance, if not more. And so if you're providing seed or you're going into a contract with the nursery, you're going to want to make sure they have you on their list because space does fill up. For speculation orders or what's in stock, you want to order in the fall to plant in the spring. If you want to do a fall plant, you also typically be ordering in the fall. That's when most nurseries are opening up their orders. But just earlier the better. Worst case, they tell you to call you back in a couple months to get when sales actually start. Especially if you want to use your own seed, call around, figure out who's going to be able to grow that for you. Um, for spring planting, soil temperature should be at least 40 degrees, and theoretically, you want no threats of frost for 2 weeks, and you want your soil to not be fully saturated. At my house, that's typically not until May, if not June. So that it very going to depend on your site. I've gotten snow mid to late April before, so it very much varies. For fall planting, it's a little bit harder to get that small window. You want there to be moisture available, but you don't want to be too close to a frost. You want to avoid the heat of the summer, with still enough time for them to grow before that frost. Soil should be moist, but not fully saturated again. It is not even the end of September, and I've had at least one frost in my house, so I don't know if I'm supposed to fall plant this year. But it definitely is going to vary depending on the site as well as the year for fall planting. Typically, it's recommended to plant in the spring, but some sites are more favorable to fall planting. You want wet, cool days if possible, but no one wants to plant in the rain, so maybe just that overcast would be nice with a little bit of moisture in your soil. It's riskier planting on warm, dry, and windy days because your plants are going to dry out, and no one can plant hundreds of plants instantly, so they are going to be sitting out. So you want to try and keep them moist and having them actively respire. So Keep them shaded. Don't, if they're in plastic, don't let them be beating down the sunlight. Just try and keep them protected as much as possible. Seedling care before planting. Typically, if you're buying from a nursery, like a not a wholesale or retail nursery, more of a commercial one, and they are storing them over winter, they're probably frozen in a freezer. Don't panic, it's okay. That's really common. Trees are dormant in the winter anyways, they're frozen in their soils, and so this is completely normal. They often will ship your trees if you're getting them shipped frozen. And so if they show up frozen, don't panic. That just means they didn't get too warm in shipment, but you want to make sure they are thawed prior to planting. If they're not thawed, then you can't correctly compact that soil around the trees. If you can plant them right away, great. If you want to plant them as soon as possible, if they're just sitting in a box in your garage for a while, that's not ideal for the trees. If you are storing them, keep them cool. A refrigerator is perfect. I realize if you have hundreds of thousands of trees, that might not be a possibility, but if you have a couple hundred, you might be able to do that. A garage will also work okay. Like I said, moist, not saturated, bare root seedlings should be wrapped to keep that moisture around them. You don't want them in wind and direct light, and only bring out as many seedlings as you're going to plant in a day, or larger trees as well. If you think you can get 100 done, bring out 100. If you think you can get 1,000 done, bring 1,000, but don't bring 100 and only plant 20 or whatever that may be. And if that does happen, it's okay. Just get them back in a cool area so they are not going to dry out. How to plant. Once again, this might sound self-explanatory, but you want the brown side down and the green side up. Just like you're planting plants in your garden, you want the roots to be in the ground. You want them to be straight up and down. As you can see in these pictures, you still have roots above the ground, and those are poorly planted. You want to dig your hole, take one tree at a time, put it in the hole, fill it back in. You don't want bark or roots in the hole, preferably avoid air. You want roots to be straight down, firmly press them down on the soil. You don't want to stomp on them, known as the death stomp. But fill in that soil, compact it, just like you would be planting something in your garden. Shovels are great. You can also use hodads to plant. I've seen people use augers to plant and then just fill in the holes by hand afterwards. So depending on your operation and how you're planting will vary. But just keep it to basics. Plant in hole, fill in hole, keep plant up and down, make sure the roots are all fully in the soil. Should you fertilize them? You probably don't need to. It's probably not recommended to. You have to remember fertilizer is a salt and it's going to pull moisture away from your plant. So if you aren't watering them, I really don't recommend fertilizing. That doesn't mean some people won't, and they say they have great success with it. If you do fertilize, you want to make sure that there's not fertilizer in direct contact with the roots. And you want the seedlings to grow to find the fertilizer in the ground. You don't want to put the root ball right on top of the fertilizer. Once they're established, so 3-ish years, you can add some fertilizer if you think it's needed. But ideally, if you're restoring a site, you want to be able to plant it and let it maintain on its own. Most people when they're doing restoration projects don't want to be going out and watering and fertilizing for the next 20 years. So ideally, there's enough nutrients in the soil to be able to maintain those plants long term. If you think about it, foresters, when they're planting, they're not giving those trees fertilizer in the woods. They're doing just fine. So where to purchase plants? Shop local whenever possible. Your seed sources are most likely going to be most similar to your site. If you're looking at a local nursery, you can save on shipping costs that way as well, especially if you can pick them up. There's less handling of the plants, and make sure you're asking those questions about seed source, elevation, and know what your site needs. A reputable nursery is going to be able to answer those questions and walk through you with that. And if they don't have exactly what you're looking for, they might be able to recommend someone else that does. So the U of I extension, my colleague Chris Schnepp puts this together every annually, and we update it as basically we get more information. But these are all nurseries. Most of them are in the North Idaho area, but we have some out of state as well, of just places that you can buy plants for reforestation and restoration as well. Um, comes out of the Extension Forestry team, so it's focused on reforestation, but most of these nurseries also just do restoration plants in general. If you guys are interested in this at all, shoot me an email and I can get it over to you. The U of I website's a little bit wonky right now just because we updated everything, so things can be hard to find, and so I'm happy to just send it to you directly. But since I used to work there, I'll put a plug in for the U of I's Pick and Forest Nursery. They grow about 500,000 seedlings every year, and they're across 70 different species. Most of them are going to be native to Idaho, and if they aren't native to Idaho, they grow well here, so they can still be beneficial in restoration projects. There's no contracts around here, so it's all speculative. So first come, first serve. They just started their sales on right after Labor Day, and so they still have quite a few seedlings available. It's a teaching facility, so they run on a relatively low staff, and they have the students at the U of I interested in nursery management and forestry, growing all the plants and handling most of them. So it's a great way to support students as well. And that's their website right there. And on the previous slide with all those other nurseries, we all work together, and so any of them will be able to help you out. And with that, that's overall my presentation. That is my contact information. Feel free to email me or call me. I'm also happy to help you figure out needs for your site and work through goals and figure out what type of plants you may need. But with that, I am happy to answer your questions and we can go from there.
Thank you, Lauren. It does look like we have a few questions in the chat. So I'll just start on one. Why not plant when frost is forecast if the seedlings are sold frozen? From Paul Allen.
Um, you don't want to plant, so that would be in regards to fall planting, I'm assuming. And in fall planting, the seedlings aren't going to be frozen yet. In the nursery, they are still going into their dormancy. They're typically not receiving all their chilling hours until late October, early November, which is typically past the planting season. And depending on the nursery, they're not even going to let them be sold or taken home during that time period. But if you're planting when there's a frost, it's going to be really hard to potentially get that soil compacted and that seedling properly planted. But you want to make sure you want to allow them to establish in the ground before frost. And if they're already dormant, they're not going to be able to do that.
And oh, here's another one. Thoughts on water collars, which I think is the kind of a something you'd put around the plant to water it during the first few years.
If you have a way to water them, that's perfect. I don't have any specific experience with watercolors, but being able to, whether it's regular irrigation, or you're able to get out there even, we always say even once a year is better than nothing. So if you have a way to be able to water them year round or for the first couple of years, I would recommend doing that.
Yeah, I've seen them around southern Idaho quite a bit. I know Idaho Fish and Game has used them in some recent post-fire restoration plantings. If I can find a link to the exact one they've used, I'll try to share that. But for shrubs, they say it's been helpful for them to have something like a water collar.
Okay, yeah. I just put my email in the chat as well for anyone that didn't get it on the other slide.
Yeah. Okay. Another one from Paul. When is broadcast seeding appropriate?
So I don't have a ton of experience with broadcast seeding. Um, who was that talked? Was that the fishing game guy that talked about doing more broadcast seeding stuff?
Yeah,
Um,
Ryan.
but it's gonna vary based on your site. I know I don't even know if I'm qualified to answer that because I don't know a ton about that. But I'd say typically broadcast seeding's done either right before frost or early in the spring before stuff starts to grow. But it's going to be very on your site, and I would ask someone else that has more information on that than I do.
Yeah, we might have to get a specific expert in here to answer some of that question because it's very particular to site.
Mhm.
Broadcast seeding, I think, has a lot of high failure rate, um, partly because it's the seed needs a lot of seed to soil contact. So if you do broadcast seeding, then you need to kind of go along after, make sure there's compaction occurring and make sure the seed has contact, highly dependent on soil moisture. And there's a lot of small mammal herbivory on those seeds. Birds, mice, they tend to eat a lot of them. So I know it's very common and it's going to happen a lot, but there's a lot of ways to I think we could bring in someone to talk more specifically about that.
Yeah, and they have
Yes, Lauren.
a lot of really good seed mixes for pastures and restoration sites with wildflowers and stuff. But yeah, that is outside of my expertise. We should look into getting someone to talk about broadcast seeding methods and successes and struggles.
And another thought of distribution maps on species. Yeah, I know you were talking about, you mentioned all the zones, the USDA plant hardiness zones. Do you know if some of those common species you mentioned have distribution maps?
Most of them do. I was trying not to clutter my slides and put a whole bunch of stuff on them. But yeah, most of them have distribution maps. Forest Service, USDA, has pretty good distribution maps out there for most things. And there's a lot of good seed transfer zone information on, especially on the timber side, the forestry side. One of the presentations I adapted for this actually had all the seed transfer zones for the conifer species. But like I said, I was trying to keep it minimal and not going into the weeds on that. But they're fairly easily available to find online.
Yeah, I know all the ones you talked about are native to Idaho,
Mhm.
so they are common here. Let's see, we did Ryan Walker was online. So he had a comment from his experience. You typically need 2 to 3 times the drilled seed rate for broadcast seeding.
I
So,
believe that.
yeah, seems good. Yeah, that could be something we could spend some more time on. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Please just put them in the chat.
If not, feel free to email me later. That works too.
That's great. Okay, and we will have another speaker in October on October 23rd. Melinda Ellison, UI Extension, is going to be talking about some of her work on willows and animal utilization of willows, both livestock and wildlife species. So please come back and attend that. And we will place Lauren's presentation up on our YouTube channel in probably next week. So if you want to see something that you missed, come back and check out that channel or look at some of the other speakers that we've had over the past summer. All right, I don't see any other questions, so thank you everyone for your time. Lauren, thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for letting me talk today.
Okay, bye.